Welcome, everyone, to the very first podcast of the International Clarinet Association's Pedagogy Committee. I am Shawn Copeland. I am the Pedagogy Co-Chair along with Jackie McIlwain. And we have got this great idea to begin to bring this information to you in a new format. So this is our very first inaugural episode. And just to kind of get us started, I would like for everyone who is on this podcast to introduce themselves. So I'm going to hand it over to George, off you go.
I'm George Stoffan. I'm professor of clarinet at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia. And I previously taught at Oakland University. Before that, I was principal clarinetist of the United States Air Force Band in Washington, D.C.
All right. Hi, everyone. I am Jackie McIlwain. I am the Associate Professor of Clarinet at the University of Southern Mississippi. And as Shawn mentioned, I am also the co-chair for, or co-coordinator for the Pedagogy Committee.
Is that our
Hi,
title?
everyone.
Sorry, Julianne.
Hi, everyone. I'm Julianne Kirk Doyle, and I'm professor of clarinet at the Crane School of Music at SUNY Potsdam. And I've been on the Pedagogy Committee now as a member and previously as Pedagogy Coordinator.
And I'm Kip Franklin. I'm Associate Professor of Clarinet at the University of South Alabama, and I'm also the Treasurer for the International Clarinet Association.
And this is just a small sample of our overall committee. And throughout the coming year, you'll see various combinations of the overall committee as we take on new topics for discussion. But we wanted to do our first one on the fundamentals of clarinet pedagogy. And I'm going to kind of start us off with what is pedagogy? That's a big word that gets tossed around, and sometimes people don't know exactly what it means. For me, pedagogy is the art of teaching. It is, it's not only what we teach, but how we teach it in terms of the techniques, the order of things, when to pause and let someone struggle and learn, and when to help them out. It's the style of the teacher, the traditions of our field, the changing traditions of our field when things need to change. But to me, it is truly the art of teaching. And I don't know, other ideas about that? Yeah, go ahead, Julie.
I certainly see the art of teaching and meeting a student where they are and helping them get to where they need to go, and or maybe even exceeding their goals, but filling in those gaps of those foundations and fundamentals that maybe they missed along the way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I would argue that it's also teaching creative and critical problem solving on the spot, you know, finding solutions or ways to explain concepts that aren't necessarily from your own teacher or from something you read in an article somewhere. I mean, really having the tools and the reasoning to be able to decipher issues and figure out solutions on the spot.
Along the same lines, I had this discussion with a pedagogy class that I last year. Began the class with the question, what is pedagogy? And they had some very interesting answers. I found that I did not have a clear answer myself when I started the class, so I did some searching for a number of definitions. And what it boiled down to was the methodology of how we present our ideas. Methodology was so very important to how students learned, and that was a common theme that ran through the class. On the one hand, we discussed how do we practice, how do we teach hand position, how do we teach posture, how do we use our airs, some of the fundamentals that we're going to be talking about in this hour. But one thing that the students really honed in on was the difference between how we describe what we do and how we present that to students at various levels and various backgrounds and experiences with the instrument. And I think that's where the art of teaching is.
Yes.
It was a very interesting discussion, an interesting semester for me.
Certainly we would talk about air differently with a 7th grader than a 9th grader versus a freshman in college. You know, absolutely. Go ahead, Jackie.
Yeah, so it's funny, whenever you mentioned what is pedagogy, Shawn, you literally said the words that I was thinking, the art of teaching. This is literally what I had in mind. And I think what everyone said is really great. And I think we're coming at it from different perspectives, and I love that. One thing that Julianne mentioned was like meeting a student where they are. And I really connect with that. I appreciate that, because I feel like there is a connection that needs to happen between the teacher and the student, and meet them where they are, playing wise, but also just on a personal level, and figuring out what they need from you, just in all of the things. So,
and even that is a skill in and of itself, to be able to see the person and diagnose to some extent like what's going on, but then quickly be able to go, okay, this is what's going on, and this is how I'm going to work with that with this person, as opposed to there isn't one size fits all with this. We don't have the way to teach, or at least when I hear meet a student where they're at, that's what I hear is like we're adapting in the moment to who's in front of us. So it's that flexibility of knowing the concept so well that you can then shape it and shift it in the right language for that person. I love that. I love that.
I'd jump on that too, and share that, you know, what you say to one student, you may say completely differently to another student. So it's having this kind of a bag of tricks in a way, or just different terminology that might resonate with different students, that we need to adapt, like you said, you know, just be sure we're adapting to that student's needs and learning style, and being aware that every student has a different style of learning and approach.
I have a really
Julianne,
oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Go
I experienced the same thing, where the idea may be the exact same idea or concept, but you're going to present it sometimes in a completely different way. Related to what Jackie was saying earlier, you have to get to know the student and what makes them click. What is that particular key that's going to open up or unlock that door in a way that is unique to them and maybe different when you're working with another student. So I think that what I found is what I've learned most about pedagogy and teaching came from my own teachers, and it was through instinct and what I could learn about the way they taught me. That became how I developed ideas and concepts for how I taught others. What I found when I got into teaching was that was really only half of it. When a student comes through the door and you learn about what's going on in their lives, you learn about their personalities, you learn about them as people, then it makes it easier to, not easier, but you can more readily unlock what it is that helps them learn better and learn more readily. So a lot of what I've learned has come through teaching and just the experience over time, learning about a person holistically.
I think it may also be worth mentioning that, you know, I think about what I learned about teaching by watching other people teach. I think too, when I was a student, you know, we would have studio class and master class session, or, you know, more recently when I was observed as a teacher as part of the academic tenure and promotion process, and the idea that watching somebody teach can inform one's own perspective of concepts that work, concepts that don't, things that are successful in a classroom versus an applied lesson, things that are successful with the student who learns this way versus the other way. So I think that the not just the art of teaching oneself, but also that sort of the collective learning environment that's experienced in something like a master class or a teaching observation can be incorporated too.
And I found when I first started teaching, I would hear my teachers' voices in my head and talk about the things the way they said them. And sometimes I would have an aha moment of something that they told me 20 years ago. And I'm like, oh, that's what they meant. And so we're planting seeds that they're going to sprout at different times. And it's so fun that we don't ever stop learning and sometimes teaching. We actually learn more by teaching and adapting. I felt like a better player the longer I've taught. That's really pushed me in different ways and directions.
I really hear everybody dancing around this one word about relationship. Like it's our relationship to our field, it's our relationship to our content, it's our relationship to our instrument, and it's our relationship to each other, you know, as colleagues, but as teacher and student. And we're meeting all of that, you know, right where it's at and right where we're at, because it's also our relationship to the content and our relationship to the instrument that we're continuing to work out and evolve. And I, you know, Julianne, I was thinking, as you said, like, you know, planting that seed. Sometimes I find I think I know what one of my teachers meant, and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, that has a completely different meaning now, like a different context, or maybe that's what they meant. Oh, I need to call him up and have a coffee time or something, you know, to really unpack this. George, you kind of mentioned some of these. I wonder if you'd like to kind of dive into what are the sort of the pillars of our pedagogy. What are the content areas that fall under pedagogy in the clarinet world?
I think the fundamentals of clarinet playing include posture, tone production, articulation, and technique. Each of these contributes to one's musical development. It's not limited to these areas alone, but they're the primary components of playing. So I think focus on fundamentals helps in reducing the mysteries involved in playing the clarinet. And I have found it could be a challenge to transcend these challenges of the instrument when we're seeking to achieve a high level of musicianship. So it's easy to spend a lot of time battling the instrument and to allow it to get in our way. But with a focus on developing skills in these areas, we can project musical ideas with great clarity and ease. So these are the topics that we've talked about and want to focus on today. It's really not limited to these topics, but it's a way of just organizing our discussion. Tone production, articulation, and technique.
Yep.
I might just briefly add one of the ones that's not on here. I think that gets sort of, I don't want to say neglected, that's not the right word, but maybe overlooked when we're talking about very instrument specific things, is still the idea of rhythm. Like that's a very musician fundamental that should be instilled. And you can, you know, we can teach great clarinet tone and technique and so forth, but the ability to execute it and have it be valuable to a player or a student is dependent on their ability to be able to sort of synthesize and realize time. So that's one thing that, is very broad and probably a lecture in and of itself, but the idea of how we teach rhythm so that students can use all these other instrument specific things to their benefit.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Jackie.
Yeah, I think Kip, what you said is great. I think in a way, rhythm it's assumed, that we would be addressing that. And I think another thing that is probably assumed is musicianship, phrasing, and things like that. It's at least that's my thought is like, oh yeah, it's assumed. Yeah, we'll deal with that. But it is important that we do address rhythm. It is important that we do address phrasing and musicianship.
It's our fundamentals are really the applied area for all of those theoretical oral skills, theory class, history, performance practice. Like what happens in the studio is the combination of that and the interpretation of that through our posture and our body and our embouchure and our air, and those are all the tools that we use to transcend through the instrument all of the things that we're learning outside of the studio, how we can apply that to the repertoire, and getting past my. Did you hear that? I'll edit that out. My Siri decided to answer that question for me. Like, why is my phone talking to me? Yeah, the sort of, I really liked what you said, George, about getting past the fundamentals, learning them, but then we're really trying to transcend them so that they're not getting in the way, and transcending the limitations of the instrument, exploring the limitations of the instrument through all of these ways that we interface with the instrument: breathing, embouchure, articulation, voicing, musicianship. Do we think that there is a particular order for these? Is there a priority, so to speak, or what do we think about that?
I kind of feel like it depends on the student, where they are, who are we teaching. If it's a college student, we're going to look at those gaps and where maybe they're getting in their own way to discover, what they need to refine to move forward in the fundamentals. So for me, I'll kind of start with the posture and then the breathing. Then maybe we get into the embouchure and tongue position, which then leads us to articulation. And obviously hand position and all those musical elements come in there too. So I think it depends on what the student is struggling with the most. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I'll ask a student, what are your biggest challenges with the clarinet right now? Where do you feel the most deficient, and how can we, get you over that hump? So, yeah.
I think go ahead, George, go ahead.
I think they're all important, and the challenge is, where do you start? I have had students in front of me play, and I listen and think to myself, where am I going to begin? And Julianne, I think that's a great technique to ask them, well, what do you think? What do you want to work on? And I think what that does is it boils it down to one or two concepts that you can focus on over the course of a lesson, over the course of an hour. As part of the evolution of my teaching, I get all of these thoughts of the things that I have to work on and to fix as a teacher. And I have found that to be a little bit too myopic and not focused on what they need in the moment. So it's been helpful for me to try to boil it down to one concept a day, or one concept in in a lesson. It's a little oversimplified, but when you approach it like that, they're more likely to remember one or two things than the 10 things that I just threw at them. In the beginning of my career, that's how I would approach it. So I think that yes, all of this is important, but if we can focus on what we can address in the moment, I think that's going to be most helpful for the student in that hour.
My kind of, as a teacher, my sort of flow chart in a lesson is I deal with what I think are the most objective things to the most subjective things. So, mentally, as I'm hearing a student play, I check, is the rhythm correct? Is the tone correct? Is the technique correct? The articulation, and then sort of the musicianship. I hate to put that last because it's where the art is, but all the other stuff has to be in place in order to access that. So that's kind of how I, when we talk about these fundamentals that George mentioned, a few minutes ago, that's my kind of pecking order for how I listen to them and also how I approach them in the applied studio and also the classroom, going from the things that are the most objective to the most subjective.
I have a question for you, and of course, this is a leading question. Do you feel that there's an aspect to teaching now that, because most of us are mid-career, I'd say, that there's an aspect to teaching now that we weren't trained for? I saw Julianne like, yeah. What would be what are we finding that is now a part of teaching that we didn't learn in our doctoral programs, but it is sort of the new endeavor in the studio? What does that look like for you, Julianne? You want to? Yeah, I saw your face first. So.
Where to start? Where to start? We talked about these personal connections and the relationship, and that's a big part of it. We've just come out of the COVID, and there's more deficiencies, not just maybe pedagogically and the way we approach the instrument with the fundamentals, but there might be some maturity. Like, how do we practice? How do we teach students to practice? Because sometimes they come in, either late high school or early college, and they don't know. They open the book and they get out their clarinet and they start top left and go down. But that's not practicing, that's running through it. And the more we practice in a run through, that's how we're going to perform. And so it's teaching them patience and that diligence. That it's better to get 8 to 16 bars really refined in a practice session than the whole etude or the whole solo piece. And so it's teaching them how to prioritize the practice. So that's, for me, that's, I feel like, one of those places we have to start early so that they're not wasting their time. They're all busy, whether it's high school, middle school, high school, college, they're busy. And so we want to make sure every practice moment counts.
You hear that, folks? Less is more. Less is more. George said it. Now Julianne has said it. Off you go, Jackie. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you asked that question, Shawn, my first thought was anxiety. Learning how to work with my students who are struggling with anxiety. A lot of them have a lot of it, and then my second thing I was thinking of is the patience aspect, and teaching them how to practice what is going to be the most beneficial and the most efficient use of time. I feel like sometimes the attention aspect is limited, and I'm saying that coming from, I have ADHD, and I've noticed that it's something that we all struggle with, and I feel like, or maybe it's just I've noticed it in my students, and I didn't recognize it whenever I was in school, as far as the attention and learning how to access it and prioritize and plan, practicing and all that.
I might also add the critical skill of teaching students or having students be self-aware and sort of self-correcting. That's in my view the ultimate goal of being a teacher, is you teach your students how to evaluate and essentially teach themselves. So the act of actually listening to oneself in a practice room and evaluating what was good, what was less good, why was it less good, and what are the solutions to make it better, versus, like Julianne said, just kind of running through it 20 minutes before your lesson or whatever.
I want to jump on that real quick too. My first year teaching here at Crane, we had Claude DeLong, saxophonist, come and give a master class. And he said to a student who just played an amazing performance of the Barrio Sequenza, but you know, there's always more to polish. He says, listen more than you play. And I thought that was such a great phrase, and I've carried that through my teaching. But listen more than you play, you know, and you can take that so many different directions. But the students are afraid to listen to themselves. They don't want to record. They don't want to go back and reflect. And yet you can learn more from that than sitting in the practice room for 3 hours with the instrument on your face. So record 15 minutes, go and listen for 15 minutes. That's worth 3 hours right there.
I would add 2 points to what everybody has said, which is, I remember when I was in school that I learned my greatest lessons as a clarinetist and musician from my teacher and my conductors and experiences in chamber music. I said a few moments ago, that a lot of what I learned about teaching was intuitive from how my teachers taught me. And I think that was part of an older generation or older tradition. I don't think anybody actually taught me to teach. And I think that one requirement for having a full-time position teaching is that you receive a DMA or PhD, and there's a lot of that goes into at least the DMA that doesn't include, or at least when I was going through school, that included courses on how do you teach, even though that was required for a position in higher education. I think a lot of that is changing, but I think the emphasis was on, in my experience, building up my musicianship so that I had something to offer to others. I think that was the focus. But I did feel ill-prepared entering the profession when I was working with students that had ADHD, that were on the spectrum, and had a lot of, that brought a lot into the lesson that when I was going through school was not something that was widely known or known about, especially when it came to teaching. So I had to learn a lot, trial by fire. And I think that was a challenge for me. The other challenge is more general. I find that students are or have been very open with me about what is happening in classes and what's going on in their lives, and I learn a lot about them and what might be inhibiting their ability to practice efficiently, and find myself being a little bit of a psychologist or psychiatrist and thinking I wasn't trained for this, and it's something that I've learned to try to accept and try to, I think, engage in an effective way with students.
What I'm really hearing from all of you, again, it's this theme of meeting the student where they're at, and what are the things that need to be filled in, what are the skills that the person needs, and a lot of it has to do around agency, like the ability of the student to take control of their own learning, of their own career, and how that applies in various settings. coming to the lesson with goals for the lesson, what they're doing in the practice room. Are they listening to themselves? Are they becoming their own teacher? And what I also hear that's really lovely is each of you are also saying, I'm still learning. Like we're talking about how we teach, and we want students to be self-reflective and learn from themselves. And you're also talking about how you are learning from your own teaching how to adapt in a teaching situation. You try something, it worked or it didn't work, you adapt. And I hear various threads of this in each of you, that, you know, this is, pedagogy is lifelong. It's in continual, it's continually developing in the moment, based on what we're bringing and what's in front of us. Shall we dive into some more nuts and bolts kind of things? We've been talking very conceptually, but I wonder, Julianne, do you have strategies for some of your favorite fundamental areas? You know, if you have one that's like, oh, I love starting with this, what are some of your strategies for these fundamentals?
Well, I always start with posture, because most of the time students come in and they've got poor posture, and that's causing half the problems and making their job much, much more difficult. So I start with, you know, if they're seated, are they in the right part of the chair so that their feet touch the floor and they're not compromising their air column, and bringing the clarinet to them, not leaning into the music, particularly when it gets hard. Is the stand high enough? You know, you can think about all these factors that impact. And what I see a lot of times with young college students is maybe it's devices. We're spending a lot more time on devices, but their eyes are going faster and they need reading glasses, but they don't know that. And so they're leaning into the stand to see the music. And so, you know, there's some places there, again, we're meeting the student where they are, but getting into that posture and just how they're physically approaching the instrument before we play a note. And then I get into the breathing and such, but I'll always do an example. I've done this at clinics, and I do this for my tech class, where I do the head and I'll play, and I'll lower my head and show them the difference in the sound. And then I'll change my posture and show that difference as well. I think a lot of our students spend less time standing than seated, but when we're standing, just making sure, again, they know how to stand on their feet, and they're choosing the right shoes that help promote a good stance. Because I talk about it all the time with the heels. A lot of the young ladies like to wear these really high heels, or maybe we're wearing shoes with really heavy, hard soles. And is that the best support for your body when you're standing and playing? So just really getting into that physical approach to playing the instrument before we even touch the fundamentals.
On that note, I remember being in a graduate school program and talking with women about heels, and no one ever talked to men. We spend most of our time in tennis shoes, and then all of a sudden we go into performing and we're standing on wood blocks. Like, men's dress shoes are wood and have a heel, and that's also a different thing, you know. And sometimes they have toes, like longer toe pointed things on the front of them. And I've seen plenty of men walk out on stage for the first time and trip, because they're not used to moving their feet with those types of shoes on. So this is universal, in terms of the footwear that you wear. And I remember learning, like, 2 weeks before your recital, you start practicing in your recital shoes. It was always a funny thing for me of like, what? And then the first time you do it, and you're like, oh, you breathe differently when your heels are higher than your toes. Yeah, I certainly will second the paying attention to the body as the first instrument in the room. And I love the demonstration of the differences, because most of us aren't taught to even sense what's going on. Let's dive a little further. What kinds of fundamentals or tactics do we use for, say, teaching embouchure? Anybody have tricks for that or strategies? Yeah, George, go ahead.
Yeah, I like to teach them to think of the bottom lip as a cushion or pillow for the reed. I think I've read that we should have 2/3 of the lip over the bottom teeth, but I don't know if that's right. It depends on everybody's lips, and structures are different. So I think we have to work with the student in front of us. What I've done more lately in my own playing, what I found in my teaching that helps is to bring the corners back and down. I used to play more with bringing the corners forward towards the corners of the mouthpiece to have a more rounded embouchure and to have a more equalized support system with the lips all the way around. But I find that I get a little bit more stability when I bring the corners back more, almost in a smile embouchure. It's a little old school, but it seems like it works for me in keeping this area firm. I teach to keep the bottom portion of the lip and the chin flat, firm, and pointed. And I found that when I bring the corners back, that helps keep it flat, firm, and pointed. So all this works together. I think that we're speaking about the embouchure in a more generic sense. I found that it's important to make observations about the student that you have in front of you, because they may have different issues. But generally, that's where I start in my thinking. I may not approach it that way. It depends on what that student needs, as we've been talking about. But I start with flat, firm, and pointed, corners pulled back and firm, and playing with a little bit of an overbite as well, so that you're engaging more of the reed with the bottom lip and even the teeth. I like to think about the feel of the teeth and the lip and the reed as being one, without any excessive pressure. Of course, no biting or tension, but just to have that strong feel and relationship of the bottom teeth and the lip and the reed, a little less on top on the mouth. Mm-hmm. That's where I start. Those are the basics for me. And there are, of course, a lot of variables that come into play as far as the reed strength and the mouthpiece and the ligature, and how all of this is a part of what we feel in terms of resistance, because the resistance we feel is going to play a role in how we grip. So that's where I start. And there's voicing involved, and we can go on from there. But I'd be curious to see what some of you think about that.
I would add briefly just two things. One of the things, so everything that George said. One of the things that I find when I'm teaching tone, and a starting point for tone and embouchure, is a lot of students will neglect the right hand thumb and its role. So the idea of actually holding the clarinet, not from the fingers, but from the mouth embouchure, and then also the right hand thumb, giving the support into the facial structures, rather than letting gravity sort of take over. And kind of the first kind of deliverable that I ask a student to work on for me in that regard is I get them to play just a C, low C, register key G, pick up the first finger, get an E. And if they can get those three notes, they can play in all of the registers of the clarinet. So that means that things are more or less working correctly in terms of airspeed, voicing, and embouchure pressure. But then the next step is to get those three notes as harmonics, rather than actually fingering them, to really kind of get a sense of how a student can control and how a student can retain and reproduce those combinations of airspeed, tongue position, and embouchure pressure when they're having to execute technique, because a lot of tonal problems are paired with crossing the registers. So that's something that, students, that's kind of like the first aha moment that students usually have.
And you're using sound as the thing to, it's working correctly based on the sound.
Yes,
And
the sound is the first diagnostic tool that students should be, I think, trained to recognize that if there's a problem with the sound, there's a problem with how I'm producing it.
And I would venture to believe, George, that that's true for you as well. Like, as you're sort of thinking about all of those different shapes and corners, and like, it's all based on what's the sound that's being produced, and how then do you shift and play with the different variables around the sound? Does that ring true for you?
Very much. It's a challenge in my teaching, because what we try to develop, I think we all try to develop, is a concept of sound, but they don't always have a concept of sound when they come in. And in order to develop a concept of sound, they have to have the mechanics right to produce that sound. So it's a little bit of a circular process. A lot of times the concept comes a lot later than the mechanics. So the challenge that I find is the analysis by paralysis, or paralysis by analysis, where we go through this checklist of things that we have to do, and we're not really teaching them to listen. And yet I'm not even sure how to teach them to listen. This comes through a lot of experience in their ensembles, and through theory and the whole experience, music history, doing a lot of listening, and they develop that, listening to great clarinetists and developing that concept. So I try to work along parallel paths of trying to share with them what I think they need in that moment, maybe those one or two things for that day, and then connect it with the sound of a clarinetist that I admire. I think it comes over time. So we're talking about the mechanics right now. What do we do at this moment? But it's really a long process. I do think that what we can do is affect how a student forms an embouchure, how they breathe. We can affect their posture in a short amount of time. I think those are the types of differences that we can make as teachers. As far as that concept of sound and this musicianship, it takes time. Can't do that in a lesson or two, but we can help them right now with their embouchure.
I think
how we package it and how we deliver this is really, really difficult. I think that's where the art comes, the art of teaching comes.
And we're all at the age of we had to go to the listening station in the library and check out the record or the CD and sit in the library and wait our turn for that listening station with the score. It was a thing we had to do, right? None of us, like, the digital age happened after college for most of us. Yes. And I talk about this all the time with my students. I'm like, you're carrying around the thing that sent us to the moon. You have access to everything recorded in the world in your hands. Like, use it. That's 90% of it is your concept. Julianne, you had something to say.
Jumping on that a little bit. Something I do in the first studio class of the year, sometimes when I go give clinics to young students, I ask them, who do you listen to? And most of the time, just something on YouTube. And they can't identify who they listen to, or where are they from, where do they play? And so I try to direct them to some resources and players to get them started. And then I bring in, 4 or 5 players you really like. You're learning a solo, listen not just to one recording, but find 10 if you can. But just getting them to listen again. And I've had some students tell me, well, there's just so much available, I don't know where to start. And that is a truth we have, that we have so much that it can be overwhelming of where do I start listening. And so I think sometimes our role as a teacher is to direct them in those directions of who to listen to, and who do you want to sound like? Who do you really like? Do you like maybe this person's tone, but this person's articulation, you know, and blend them together. So just getting them to listen and again, that agency, you know, find what they like and try to emulate it. So it's all that listening.
Yeah. Jackie, this was one of your kind of spearheaded projects on the committee to kind of put together a list of all of the resources that are actually available for us out there. Would you like to talk a little bit about, you know, where do we start? What's out there? What do we?
Yeah, absolutely. It is one of those things where I took on this project and then I got overwhelmed with the amount. It was to the point where I was like, I don't even know where to start, because just going down that rabbit hole, there's so much. There are books out there. You know, shameless drop, Shawn and I wrote a book, Body Mapping for Clarinetists. That, you know, so many books out there, so many pedagogy books. And you know, there's so many different method books and etude books and all sorts of different things out there. So some things that I use a lot in my studio, I love the exercises that are in Squeak Big by Philip Paglialonga. And then David Cook has a new book out there. Paula Corley, Kristen Denny Chambers has a lot of really wonderful resources for younger students. Kelly Burke has a great clarinet warm-up book. So I mean, there's just so many. I mean, that's just like scratching the surface. That's like what kind of comes to mind right off the bat, and things that I've used. YouTube. The kids love YouTube. And there are so many great resources out there on YouTube. And then there are some that are not as reputable. And it's great that there's so much out there. You know, I know Michelle Anderson and Mike Lowenstern have a ton of things out there. And I'm sure that there's many others that are just wonderful resources. Of course, there's podcasts too, right? This is a very new concept in the last, I don't know, 5 to 10 years that it's come out, and it's really gaining a lot of popularity. So there's podcasts out there. There's also a ton of stuff online. You know, there's Clarinet Journal, the Clarinet Institute, IMSLP. There's so many repertoire lists. There's a ton of fingering charts and so many different things. So yeah, this project that I took on is much larger than I initially thought, and I'm glad though. It's opened my eyes to really recognize that there are so many options, and so to know some of those and be aware of them, and be open to the different options too, and recognizing that, yeah, the books, that's the first thing that comes to my mind. What pedagogy books? But that's not necessarily what would come to my students' minds. You know, they're probably thinking YouTubes or podcasts, you know, so recognizing that I need to be more familiar with those so that I can help my students and point them in the direction that will be helpful for them.
So in the day and age where basically anyone can put anything online, how would we advise students to discern which resources to follow, which resources to click past? You know, what can we do with that?
The first thing that's coming to my mind is look up who they are. Know who they are. If you're struggling to find any information on this person, then maybe try finding some other resources, you know. And not to say that it's not good information, it very well could be, but making sure that you're listening to reputable resources, I think is the first thing. So whoever it is, Google them, see what you find on them, you know, and see if that is something that you want to you know, listen and take in for yourself. Yeah.
And if a person is trying to do this on their own, Kip, I kind of want to hand this question to you. Like if a person doesn't have a teacher, and they're starting out listening to our podcast, I can't imagine how that would come about, but it's out there. You know, how would you do this on your own before you have the opportunity to work with someone?
I think that that's hard, but I think that the first thing that I would say, and it relates to everything that we talked about, is if you're out there without a teacher, the most important thing I think that you can do is listen. And I think that everything that's been said about, well, it was some guy, I heard it, some guy on YouTube played this. Well, some guy on YouTube might not be the definitive version to necessarily emulate. So I think listening first, but then exactly what Jackie said, making sure that you are listening to quality clarinet playing that comes through it can be as simple as a Google search. I would also say that if it comes from a recording studio or some type of production company, that it has merit to it. So I think that listening is the first spot to start if you don't have a teacher. And if you're really in doubt about whether or not what you're listening to is reputable, there are people that you can reach out to in the community. I mean, talk to, the first thing that I think of is, find your closest university that has a music program and email the clarinet teacher there and say, hey, could you give me 5 artists that I could listen to? And, maybe sometime are you willing to hear me play, so that you plant that seed for the future. I also think that in saying listen, it involves more than just a YouTube or a Spotify engagement. I think that you shouldn't undervalue or overlook actually attending concerts.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are fortunate that you are in an area that has a clarinet culture already in it, and there's some things like clarinet recitals or university studio recitals, many times those are free to the public, and that would allow you to go and see sort of a wide spectrum of repertoire and abilities and development levels. If not, make the drive to see your closest regional, or if you live in a bigger city, maybe a metropolitan symphony orchestra concert, and read the program and find out who the principal and second clarinet and auxiliary clarinet players are on the program. And that would be the thing that I would start with. I think that, as you sort of alluded to, the fact that we all walk around with these phones and have access to everything is a wonderful thing, but also a bad thing at the same time, because we don't necessarily have a filter to run it through. So I think that we need to look maybe to institutions, at maybe not ultimately, but certainly as a first step in terms of how to get quality clarinet playing in our ears. And when I say institutions, I mean academic ones, certainly, but I also mean symphony orchestras, community bands seeking out ways to hear live ensembles.
Yeah, thank you. I want to kind of reiterate and circle back to the importance of listening, that the more developed your concept of sound is, that will transcend even through the equipment that you're working on. You will figure out how to make that sound through the first mouthpiece you ever picked up and the first clarinet you ever picked up. You will figure it out. You may have to fix it later, but you will figure out how to create that sound. And that concept of sound will stay with you. And then, when you are in an area where you get to study with a person, it just becomes easier then to create that sound when you have the opportunity to work with someone and develop an embouchure and develop, your knowledge of equipment that is going to help you. Like, it's just going to get easier and easier and easier to create that sound. But it all really does come back to, what is the concept that you have in your ear? Any final closing comments from anyone you're kind of sitting on wanting to get out?
I'll just jump in. You mentioned equipment. Right after I'm looking at the posture and all of those things, I do ask students about their equipment. You know, how old is your mouthpiece? How old is your clarinet? When did you last have it adjusted? You know, and sometimes they'll come in, oh, I've never had it worked on. Oh, this mouthpiece is 8 years old. And we need to talk about keeping our equipment in good shape so that we can do all the things we need to do on the instrument easily without fighting that equipment. So that is another line of things to think about, and of course could be its own podcast in itself. So but thinking about the setup, that the instrument is your amplifier, so we don't want it to have any blocks in it. So
I definitely see that as a coming episode. Well, thank you all so much for your time. I greatly appreciate it. And to those of you who are listening, we are the Committee for the International Clarinet Association. We are here to serve you. And so we would love to hear your thoughts, your reactions, your questions, your requests for future podcasts. So by all means, please send us a direct message or an email, and we would love to take this further with you. So thanks so much, and we'll be seeing you soon.